Hello and welcome to the 11th episode of Season 10 of the Dark Money Files, in which we shine a light into a murky world. I am Ray Blake, and with me is my co-host, friend and business partner Graham Barrow. Hello Graham.
Hello Ray.
Graham, fund managers can have a really tricky time trying to make sure that when they onboard new investors, they don't onboard the wrong ones. But with each individual having multiple records across multiple jurisdictions, they open themselves up to potential fraud and reputational damage every time.
Well, that's true, Ray. But with Cure, K-U-R-E, the new product from Deeppool, global fund managers are enjoying a single, always-on system that consolidates information into a single investor record and updates those records whenever and wherever they change. We suggest you read up about it further at deep-pool.com.
I agree. And I see it's all change at Companies House, Graham.
Oh, I'm not sure the present tense is entirely appropriate, Ray. I think maybe we ought to say it will be all change at Companies House at some point in the not too distant future.
Oh, that's got a ring to it, hasn't it? Yeah. Yes, I think you're right. But before we go into why, we should explain exactly what we're talking about, perhaps.
I think we probably should. And what we're talking about is the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act of 2023.
Oh, Act has a lovely sound to it, doesn't it? We've been speaking about the bill for so long. Now, among other things, that's designed to bring about significant reform to Companies House, isn't it?
Well, it jolly well is. And by the way, a lot of those other things, which you just referred to, are also really quite interesting. So maybe, Ray, once we've discussed these Company House reforms, we should go on and look at some of those other things.
Oh, I think we definitely should. And the background to this bill stroke act has had its ups and downs, hasn't it?
It really has, Ray, and it's been a long time coming. And I can't help but notice that within days of it being enacted, the sponsoring minister, which was Suella Braverman at the Home Office, lost her job.
Hopefully, coincidentally. I hope that doesn't correlate.
Let's hope so, because the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly, was himself once the target of a spoof company called Cleverly Clogs Limited that got the originator of that company into rather hot water.
I remember it well. That was a chap called Kevin Brewer who decided that a great way of highlighting the deficiencies of Companies House would be to incorporate a few companies in the names of well-known politicians.
Well, he did, and Cleverly Clogs Limited was one of them, and it sported not just Mr. Cleverly, but Baroness Lucy Neville Rolfe, who is currently a Minister of State at the Cabinet Office.
And it didn't end well for Kevin, who mistook the current political mood as being rather more accepting of satire than it might have been, because he then became the first person to be fined for providing false information to Companies House.
Which, in the light of the stuff we report around almost daily on dodgy companies, is frankly laughable.
Well, you just can't do satire anymore, can you, Graham? No. And sadly for Kevin, it was more than £12,000 of laughable, so he probably wasn't that amused in the end.
I think you're probably right. But, okay, let's get down to business, the Act. So what, Ray, are the main changes that the Act will introduce?
Well, I suppose the first one we should talk about is identity verification.
Identity verification. It will still come as a shock to lots of people that decades after the notion of requiring proof of people's identity before engaging in most financial transactions, it is still possible to form a company in the UK without providing any proof whatsoever.
I know, I'm always reminded of that Jeremy Hardy sketch where he's a 1940s spy proffering a piece of paper that says, "This is Mr. Smith. He is not a spy." And that being absolutely accepted by all.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's going to continue to be the case that you can set up a company without any identification until the Act is both in force, which is anticipated to be early 2024, and implemented.
Yes, and as I understand it, they are not the same things.
No, I don't think they are. I think coming into force means that the powers conferred by the Act are now legally capable of being implemented, but the implementation itself will require additional resources, systems and controls to be put in place before that can work.
And I suspect that's not going to be a quick job.
Well, I wouldn't have thought so. But when verification does come in, it will mandate verification of directors and persons with significant control, PSCs.
Who equate quite closely but not precisely to a beneficial owner.
Yeah, exactly. And failure to perform that verification will also be an offence.
All right, so is this just for new directors and PSCs, Ray, or is it for all of them?
All past and present, Graham.
Yeah, with more than 5 million active companies on the register who will fall within the scope of this, that is not a small task.
I mean, hence our concerns around the implementation timetable.
Yes. So what about corporate directors, Ray?
Now, interestingly, the Act bans them, Graham.
What completely?
Well, no, there's a clause which allows for a principles-based exception.
Oh, why am I chuckling? I don't know. So come on, what's the principles-based exception?
Well, it's where all of the corporate directors are natural persons who have gone through the new identity verification process.
Okay, so if I got that right, so where the director is itself a corporate, their directors have to be.
Yep.
Okay. But what about if those corporate directors are all overseas companies?
Well, I think we're going to have to wait and see how they're dealt with.
Yeah, that's probably going to be in the fine print, I guess. So will Companies House then be responsible for all of this verification process?
No, it won't. The legislation allows for it to be done on their behalf by authorised corporate service providers.
And what exactly does authorised mean?
It's a fairly important word, isn't it, in that sentence? Yeah. It means being authorised by Companies House to act as an indirect verification service. And one of the requirements is that they must be registered with an anti-money laundering supervisory authority.
Okay, now, I'm sorry to be a doom monger here, but someone has to do it. There are lots of companies of all sorts of flavours registered with AML supervisors, but that doesn't mean that they are properly supervised in an active sense. And anyway, if these companies and their supervisors are overseas, and let's be honest, there are huge numbers of overseas incorporations here in the UK, exactly how much cover does that provide?
Yeah, well, I think that's another case of the devil being in the detail, which we just don't have yet.
Okay, so I think we'll clearly be coming back to this when the enactment does take place and when the detailed procedures are published.
Yeah, I mean, for example, the Act provides for alternative methods to be made available for people unable to use the digital method, which is quite right from an inclusivity and diversity point of view. But of course, it's one more potential route for those with criminal intent to abuse in order to circumvent the rules.
But the Act is explicit, isn't it, that anyone failing to pass these verification checks will be barred from acting as a director.
Yeah, absolutely, Graham. It's just like anyone failing to get through their KYC and due diligence checks when applying for a bank account today isn't allowed to have one, which is why there's zero money laundering happening in the world today.
Ray, there are times when you can be even more ironic than Alanis Morissette.
Now, that's a very low bar, of course, but I do applaud the use of ironic meta-irony there.
Thank you. Yeah, and these changes apply not just to limited companies, do they, but other legal forms as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So PLCs and LLPs are also included.
But not limited partnerships.
Now, that's interesting. They get a special section of this Act all to themselves, which we will come to eventually.
Oh, I can't wait.
Well, you're going to have to.
Okay. So what else?
Well, there's some technical stuff about who can and cannot file on a company's behalf.
Well, I think that's fair enough.
And the registrar is being given broad powers to check, remove, or reject information either being submitted or already on the register.
Well, that's an interesting task given the 5 million or more existing active companies, which must encompass hundreds of millions of data points. Not to mention that new companies are being added at the rate of around 20,000 a week.
Well, yeah, the government fact sheet on this says that the powers will be used sparingly, where, as a result of other information available to it, there is a concern about the data's integrity. In other words, we'll get up and do something if an alarm clock happens to go off.
And that suggests, I suppose, sharing information with other government agencies or them sharing information with companies' house.
Yeah, it does sound like it. But as we know, often the concerns will arise from an open source search, and it doesn't sound like that's in the mix.
No, it doesn't. Okay. So while we're on the subject of sharing, who can share and with whom?
Well, the Act gives Companies House the power to share proactively with law enforcement, regulatory and other public bodies, as well as receiving information from those bodies.
Okay, so I see it can also receive and disclose information to any person, which enables the registrar to perform their functions. And that's free from any confidentiality restraints, although obviously still subject to full data protection.
Which suggests you could provide them with lots of interesting information and they could potentially respond with feedback and follow-up questions.
Well, that could be fun.
For certain definitions of fun, yeah. It also includes the ability for certain regulated entities to access data where Companies House is satisfied that disclosing the information will help in carrying out CDD in order to prevent or detect potentially criminal activity.
Wow. Now, I wonder if that includes stuff like email addresses and IP addresses and underlying residential addresses and all that sort of stuff.
The stuff we've been hungering for day after day for a long time. Well, I mean, once again, we're going to have to wait for the detail, but seems plausible to me.
Well, that would be fantastic. I also see the registrar has powers to query company names.
Yeah, now it's quite limited and it relates just to where the name might be used to facilitate crime.
What like a clone company being used for invoice?
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? Also, where the company name suggests a false connection to a foreign government or one which contains computer code.
See, that last one is a bit bizarre, isn't it? But it's really important because so many firms connect to Companies House electronically through their API. And people were screwing with company systems by using, for example, SQL syntax for their company name.
Like drop table, which can do all sorts of damage.
I think it not just could, I think it did.
Well, yeah.
In some cases, yeah, absolutely.
And then we get this really interesting requirement for all companies to have an appropriate registered address.
Which means?
Well, which means that if mail is sent to that address, there should be someone there who can respond on behalf of the company. And also that should registered mail be sent there, someone must be capable of signing for it.
Well, that's going to be an interesting conundrum for some of the bigger mass registration addresses where, we know that 100,000 companies are registered to it. Wow.
But no people are present, yeah. All the more so as the company's got to provide an appropriate email address, which largely means the same as for the registered address. It must be capable of being answered by someone authorised to speak on behalf of the company.
Okay, well, that's pretty good. Are there any get-out clauses from those requirements?
Yes. All of this applies unless you have a reasonable excuse.
And what would a reasonable excuse be? Right.
Don't know, Graham. Hasn't been defined.
Oh, no. Oh. Okay. Yeah, there we go. But I think it's also worth remembering that if an entity's been set up as a burner company, all of this might be too late as it's already past its sell-by date before any of those issues actually kick in.
Yeah, but it's still a step in the right direction. And over the years, in fact, over the decades, there's a long history of acts like this being passed with detail being left to a later stage. And, by and large, that detail is fleshed out, and generally the civil service do a good job with it.
I agree, and obviously there's stuff that we'll only learn when it's been put into practice. So I know I'm with you 100%.
We have to be patient.
Let's applaud the fact that we are taking these steps in the first place. Yeah.
Quite right. There's some more changes as well. There's the accounts changes.
Oh, yes. Now, this is interesting. So no longer are you allowed to file simplified accounts, which has been a bugbear of mine for ages. All companies will now be required to file a profit and loss account and, not just a balance sheet on its own, because that's simply not enough to tell you anything useful about a company.
No, absolutely. It could have very low assets and liabilities, but an enormous turnover on a tiny profit margin.
Yeah, and you don't get to see that on just a balance sheet, do you? No. Okay, Ray, you mentioned there were also reforms to limited partnership arrangements. That did not pass me by. So what are they?
Well, in some respects, they're quite similar to the new legal entity requirements. So, for example, the limited partnership must have a UK connection.
Okay, and how do you prove that?
Well, either by using your principal place of business address, if you've got one, or by providing the residential address of a general partner, or failing that, the address of an authorised company service provider which is acting for the limited partnership.
Okay, so if I've got that right, if the limited partnership is operating entirely outside of the UK, and lots of them do, it will now need to have a UK-based authorised company service provider, which will allow the limited partnership to use its address.
Yeah, although it isn't a lot different from the current practice where we see large concentrations of limited partnerships at corporate service provider addresses.
Well, that's entirely true, yes.
Now, next, you have to appoint a registered officer and provide named contacts for all general partners, which are themselves legal entities.
Oh.
There are all sorts of potential variations of entity types which could be involved. So this is one of those where we will, once again, have to see how it works in practice before fully understanding the consequences.
Yes. So presumably also the new verification requirements will apply to limited partnerships as well.
They'll apply to the registered officer of the limited partnership, yeah, or by the authorised company service provider if relevant. But this will be covered in yet-to-be-published secondary legislation.
Yeah, secondary legislation is very common with an act of this size and consequence. So I think secondary legislation will also be covering a requirement to bring limited partnerships into line with the business categorisation rules using the standard industry classification or SIC codes.
Yeah, quite right. And the registered email address rules we spoke about earlier will also apply to limited partnerships.
Good. And one other intriguing little element, which to be honest had escaped my notice previously, is that no one who is disqualified to act as a director can now become the general partner of a limited partnership.
Yeah, now we'd never clocked this before, but it is a way around disqualified directors getting access to some form of registered entity, which has now been closed down.
Yeah, and I also see that LPs, limited partnerships, must now provide a whole lot more information than they have been required to hitherto.
Yeah, names, addresses, service addresses, and if the general partner is a person, their full name, date of birth, nationality, and where they're resident.
Which is about 95% more than they've ever provided previously. I mean, it's a huge amount more detail.
Yeah, this is Mr. Smith. He is not a wrong 'un.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, of course, some of this, like full date of birth, email and residential address, is protected information and it won't be on the public register. But it's still a huge step forward.
Yeah, and if we go back to the information sharing requirements, I think it's reasonable to assume that a lot of this data will be cross-checked with other government databases like HMRC, Majesty's Revenue and Customs, or the Land Registry, and others to validate the accuracy of what's been provided.
Yeah, reasonable to assume that, but not necessarily that quickly, because I foresee all sorts of systems issues before making that work effectively.
Do you know, I think you're probably right, given our knowledge of how systems work. But But it's nevertheless really, really interesting changes, which we will clearly have to come back to and look once it's in practice. But I think for the moment that covers this introduction to those corporate transparency reforms.
Yeah, and an introduction is a bit of a teaser, isn't it, to what else there might be?
Yes, absolutely. Ray, I know you've been doing some work on other sections. Has you been asked to do some informational training on them? Like, for example, the failure to prevent fraud requirements. So given that you've already done some deep dive into that, shall we talk about that in our next episode?
I'm looking forward to it.